Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Babylon 5 Season 5. This video is part of a series of videos where I review every episode of Babylon 5, one season at a time. In this video, I'll cover all the episodes of Season 5. So Season 5 of Babylon 5 is an interesting one. It does tend to stand out apart from all the other seasons. Many consider this the worst season of Babylon 5, while others say Season 1 is worse. But regardless of that, Season 5 is set apart from the rest of the series as it's not part of JMS's original 5-year plan for the show. As any Babylon 5 fan will tell you, when coming up with the concept of the show, JMS had a 5-year plan for the show. However, at the start of Season 4, it appeared the show was being cancelled, so they sped up the plan to do the final 2 years of the plan within Season 4. However, it turned out that the show was picked up by TNT for a 5th season, but that wasn't until after the 5-year plan had already been completed. But they decided to go ahead with the 5th season anyway. So regardless of whether it's good or bad, what I would say makes Season 5 stand out is that it's more of an epilogue to the main story, which ended when Season 4 ended. That doesn't necessarily make it bad, though. I must admit, it was interesting to explore a new dynamic with the newly formed alliance and Sheridan as its president, but it does set it apart as a separate story, or at least a separate part of the story. Kind of like all the Babylon 5 TV movies, which I will not be reviewing or including in this review, mainly because I don't have access to them. Those TV movies were epilogues that took place after the final episode of Babylon 5, after we saw how Sheridan would die and how the story would end. There were just more pieces of information to help flesh out the world, but felt like appendices, kind of like, how the Silmarillion feels compared to the Lord of the Rings. And I'd say Season 5 falls into that same category. In fact, I feel that they shouldn't have called this Season 5 of Babylon 5. Instead, they should have called it a sequel series and given it a subtitle like Babylon 5, The Aftermath, or something like that, because it feels like another series, or at the very least an epilogue, rather than the last season of a TV show. And it does kind of feel like a lesser version of the show that came before it. Now, this season saw the departure of Susan Ivanova, whose actress elected to leave the show, a decision I can't say I disagree with, and she's replaced by Captain Lockley, the Earth captain who fought on Clark's side during the Civil War, and so insists on doing things her way and by the book, but has a tentative relationship with Sheridan, and this character is okay. In fact, I tend to look forward to her getting more screen time, as I find her presence is a new dynamic that shakes up the status quo. But for some reason, since I first watched the show about 10 years ago or whatever, every time I try to picture what she looks like, I kept thinking of Sarah Palin, which is weird. Isn't fair. Every time I was like, I could picture who took over the captain in Babylon 5. It's Sarah Palin, which I don't know. She doesn't really look like Sarah Palin. She's certainly not as dumb. But anyway, I've talked before about the opening sequence of each season, and this season's opening sequence is far and away the worst. As I mentioned before, any opening sequence without the signature Babylon 5 theme song is a disappointment to me. But not only does the season not have, the sequence does not have the awesome Babylon 5 theme, it has a really cheesy theme song instead. In fact, the whole opening sequence reminds me of like a cheesy 80s show with like sequence of the actors smiling cheesily when their names come up. It's so dumb. It doesn't seem like it belonged to something from the late 90s at all. And like it starts out with, instead of having a monologue, which I always thought those monologues were dumb anyway, but instead it has like flashes of what happened the 4 previous seasons, which to me this feels out of place because it's describing what happened the first 4 seasons and don't really have anything to do with what's happening now, but whatever. And there are a few storylines that they didn't get to touch on as much in Season 4, having to rush through it, such as the coming tension with the Telepaths and the risk of other raiders, which of course has to do with the story of the Drakh. So when they got to do another season, they had a chance to touch on some of these storylines that they had to abandon in order to get to the end of the story by the end of season 4. So this season was kind of split into two, where the first half of the season focused more on Byron and his group of rogue telepaths, and the second half focused more on the Drakh manipulating a war against the Centauri. Now, both storylines were in the whole season. Like, the storyline with the Centauri was preambled and began in the first half of the season, and we got some follow-up to the repercussions with the rogue telepaths in the second half of the season, but it was pretty much split that way. And I must say, I thought the second half of the season about the Centauri was much better than the first half about the Telepaths. In fact, I would say that season 5 overall is much better than I remember it being, as I remember it being quite bad and unnecessary. And while I would say that's still true of the first half of the season, I actually think it gets really good in the second half of the season. Like, the first half reminded me a lot of many of the pointless, silly, and meandering episodic nature of season 1, whereas the second half of the season reminded me more of the epic, serialized nature of season 4. So I would say the season was better than season 1, but not as good as the later seasons. The storyline with Byron, whom I refer to as Skinny Fabio, because that's what he looks like to me. It's hard to take him seriously as a refugee, and especially a revolutionary, with like his hair all shiny and silky. It seems like he belongs more on the cover of a romance novel. But don't get me wrong, it was an interesting concept, which could have been interesting, but they kept fluffing it up and taking it to a boring or predictable directions. But as far as the storyline with the Drakh manipulating the Centauri, this was dark, twisted, fascinating long-term story arcs that reminded me of the ones that they had in seasons 2, 3, and 4. In fact, if you recall, from my season 4 review, I didn't like the Drakh at all, and I thought they were kind of boring, but this season made them much more interesting and wickedly sinister. I thought they did an amazing job with it. But the one main drawback to this storyline is we already saw the ending to this back in season 3 when Sheridan went to the far future, so it's just like going through the paces to get to what we know is going to happen, and that kind of deflated things for me a bit. It's like the show spoiled itself and it let a spoiler in the show for the end of the show in season 3. It's like someone who likes to read the ending of the book first, but the show forced this upon us. I still liked it though, and I thought it was interesting. I'm just saying, I probably would have liked it more had there been more elements of surprise and the unexpected involved, but that's just me. At any rate, let me now get into the individual episodes, starting with the premiere episode, No Compromises. Now, I did really enjoy this episode, as this episode gave me exactly the kind of follow-up I wanted to see after the end of Season 4, and that is to learn about the new dynamic on Babylon 5 after the formation of the Alliance, and to see that Sheridan is no longer the captain but is the president of the Alliance, which is based there. It's going to be a bit hard for me to not call him Captain Sheridan because I'm so used to saying that, and President Sheridan doesn't have the same ring to it, but I do like the change in character and seeing how he takes on his new role as president. Plus, I really do dig the goatee. It's a nice look for him that shows that he's changed a bit. It's also interesting that that President Sheridan is the one who insisted Earth government still run Babylon 5, and that he handpicked someone who fought on the other side, but it's someone that he can trust in order to try to rebuild stability, which does make a bit of sense. But if you've watched my season 4 review, you know how I feel about those who supported Clark. But I'll actually touch on that a bit more later. As for the episode itself, although I did really enjoy seeing this new dynamic, the plot of the episode is a rehash of something we've already seen before, where someone who fought on Clark's side holds a grudge against Sheridan and tries to assassinate him. So it's not very original, although I would say that plot makes total sense given what happened with the Civil War, and it allowed for some great opportunity for Garibaldi to prove himself, and Sheridan proves that he values other life above his own, plus seeing that Lockley is working with Sheridan and the others to accomplish the same goals is very interesting. So it was a good and interesting first episode, but not a great one. So next episode is The Very Long Night of Londomollari. Although I didn't totally hate this episode, this is what I would call sigh-worthy, as it's a very typical episode about someone getting a terminal illness and their life hangs in the balance, and then you go inside their head during these events to see their regrets, blah 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 blah. There have been dozens of episodes like this, and it's all tired and cliched. I rarely find it interesting. In fact, some of Franklin's lines in this episode were so cliched and stereotypical. Not only was I rolling my eyes, sometimes I was even slapping my forehead. Like when Franklin says something like, "I've done all I can. He has to fight for his own life now." I can guarantee you that in real life, no doctor has ever said that. Ever. This is only something you find in TV shows and films, or more specifically, melodramas, where they really want to artificially set up a storyline that's more about the dying man's inner drama than it is about the medical science involved. It's a cliche I find highly cheesy and highly annoying. That being said, the episode did surprise me by not just being another throwaway cliche. In fact, it's a very interesting character study of Londo, as it focuses on the events of the beginning of Season 4, where Londo had to watch G'Kar be tortured and there was nothing he could do about it, and the guilt that was still eating him alive. Even though he knows intellectually there was nothing he could have done, and had he spoken out on G'Kar's behalf, it would likely made things worse for him. But he still eats himself over it, and he still feels guilty about not doing more when a good man was being tortured. And so it was interesting seeing him come to terms with it, and I found the ending where G'Kar was worried about Londo dying, which is a big step for him because he was genuinely concerned. And when Londo wakes up, the first thing he does is apologize to G'Kar. That was very touching. So the later half of the episode was interesting and a bit powerful. Doesn't change the cliche nature of the premise of the episode, though. So, next episode is the Paragon of Animals, which I think is a really good episode. This episode gives us a true glance at the new dynamic of the Alliance and all that entails and how it functions, and also the function of the Rangers. I think the way this episode begins is engaging, as it starts with the Rangers making a promise to a world in danger that is about to be overrun by by mercenaries or thieves or whatever who are gonna kill them and take all their stuff. And so that Ranger is then killed on his way back to Babylon 5 trying to get help. So right away it shows you the ground level reality and what the stakes are involved. And then it goes into the politics behind the situation, how simply sending help isn't as easy as it sounds. As when Sheridan makes a plan to take action, he gets intel that someone in the Alliance is perpetuating these attacks. So he had just given their attack plans to their enemy, who plans to ambush them. And he does find out that the enemy is in fact the Drazi, who want to remain anonymous because they still want to enjoy their status as a member of the Alliance while still invading worlds or supporting those who do invade worlds in order to get their resources or to keep them down so they don't interfere with their power, which directly violates the rules of the Alliance. And so they want to do this in secret. And I love how Sheridan is very smart about this. And instead of confronting the Drazi directly, he comes up with like a clever scheme that would both protect the world under attack and force the Drazi to admit their scheming. And that was absolutely brilliant. So this wasn't the best episode ever, but it was still really good stuff. I love political intrigue stories like this one. I think it was executed pretty well. So, next episode was not executed so well, and that was A View from the Galley. I'm not going to mince words here. This episode sucks. It was Babylon 5's attempt to do an episode like The Next Generation's Lower Decks, where we see the everyday events of the space vessel, but from the point of view of the little guy and the commoner rather than like the command staff. I have no problem with this concept in general, as Lower Decks is in fact, in my opinion, one of the better episodes of The Next Generation, but Lower Decks is an exceptional example of doing this concept in the best way possible, where the story was fascinating, and the characters were fully fleshed out, and you were really invested in them. This episode is the opposite of that. The characters we focus on are annoying, uninteresting, and cliched, don't feel like real people. Instead, they feel like stereotypes of mechanics or the worker class. And the way they talk about the main characters like Sheridan and Lockley felt so fake. And the way they just planted these two characters into the main story of the episode also felt really fake and really forced. It was just cringe-worthy bad. And the story of the episode itself sucked. It was just a throwaway, waste-of-time story about some weird aliens of the week that we never seen before and will never see again, coming to threaten Babylon 5 for who? Because they're evil, I guess? I don't fucking know. But anyway, they're defeated and they leave. This episode sucks. It just sucks. So, moving on. So after that, we get A Learning Curve, which is another bland throwaway Season 5 episode. Although not as bad as the previous episode, as it is, passable, but also forgettable. It's another concept-type episode where we see the events of Babylon 5 from the perspective of two Minbari students training to be rangers. And Season 5 seems to like these concept episodes where we see the events of Babylon 5 from another group's perspective that we don't usually see from. And all of them suck. This one isn't so bad. It's okay. It's an interesting story in itself. And I did enjoy seeing the practical use of the Rangers and how Sheridan can exercise his authority to use them, rather than the Earth-run security forces. But I also find the story about the students or cadets boring, as they often are treated like cliches and not real people, and I don't think this episode is any different. I believe this is also the episode where we had Garibaldi, and we had this storyline with him not liking Lockley, and he's being a dick to her, and he confronts her about being on Clark's side, and she fights up for herself, and it's like, I had to stand up, blah, I didn't believe that we should go against our own president, our own government, blah blah blah, and people supported her and cheered for her. Again, this is what I was saying before in Season 4. No. Anyone who supported Clark should be in jail. And if she still supports Clark, she should be in jail. This whole thing about, we have to make peace with the other side is horseshit unless they admit they were wrong and apologize for their mistakes. I'm not so strict. I think maybe, not everyone who fought on Clark's side should be thrown in jail, because some people, there were circumstances perhaps they couldn't get out of. But if they still support the right and still say what Sheridan did was wrong, then they should be thrown in jail, because fuck them. Sheridan overthrew an evil dictator who slaughtered, who genocide, he killed. Anyway, I talked about this enough in Season 4, so moving on. Next episode is Strange Relations. So now, let me get into the skinny Fabio and his group of rogue telepaths. They've actually been on the show since the first episode of the season and have popped up in pretty much every episode, but have never really been involved in the main story until this episode. So I like the concept of a group of telepaths on the run from Psychor, and that Sheridan would take pity on them and want to help them, which I agree seems to paint Sheridan in a positive light. However, the show seems to be stuck in this moralizing where the point of the story has to be that Sheridan made a mistake by helping the telepaths, and so it warns how doing things out of good intentions and wanting to help others can come back and bite you on the ass, and ultimately is not the right thing to do. The problem is, I don't think it's executed very well, and oftentimes characters make decisions and events occur that I would call very contrived, that seem out of place, but are there to reinforce the point that helping telepaths was a mistake. It's like the show is screaming in my ear that helping the telepaths is a bad thing, rather than telling a natural or interesting story. Skinny Fabio, Byron or whatever, in particular, seems to act like an idiot or do things out of character in order to reinforce this, and as a result, the character never comes off as a realistic character to me. In this episode in particular, Bester comes on board to take the telepaths, which Lockley wants him to do, but Sheridan is locked into having already promised to protect, Byron and his group, so has to stick with not giving him to Bester. But again, I kind of side with Lita that the telepaths should be protected from Psychor. And also, with the return of Bester, they address the fact that Garibaldi wants him dead because of what he did to him in Season 4, and the excuse they come up with to prevent him from doing that is that Bester had implanted what he calls an Asimov protocol in his head that prevents him from hurting him no matter how much he wants to. And that seems kind of convenient to me. I know B5 apologists will always say that GMS had every single little thing planned out, but I don't buy that for a second. I think, to me, this plot in particular screams of written on the fly just for this episode. But whatever. I mean, it was fine. It does make sense, so I'm not that much against it. And of course, we also learned in this episode that Sheridan and Lockley were married, which pisses off Delenn. This is bedtime. That's what I think of that storyline. Why did they do this? What does it add to the story? Why do I care? Answer: I don't. So moving on. So next episode is Secrets of the Soul, and this episode was fine. It was fine. It was pretty non-offensive. It wasn't all that interesting, but it was probably one of the better episodes to focus on Skinny Fabio, as he did come off as a bit more of a dynamic character here, and it focused on his love story with Lita, which is a concept of which, the whole love story thing sounds dumb to me, but I thought its execution in this episode was actually done pretty well. And I thought this was a decent character journey for Lita, as you see her start to identify more and more with these rogue telepaths. The one thing that never really sat right with me, and I kind of touched on this in Season 4 as well, is the way the crew sort of distance themselves from Lita and don't really count her as one of them. And considering all that she's done to help them in the Shadow Wars and the Earth Civil War, I think that's treating her very unfairly. In fact, to be perfectly frank, I outright don't buy it. I don't think it fits in Franklin, Sheridan, Garibaldi, or Zach's character to treat her like this, and I do think it is done solely for plot convenience, and therefore it's bad writing. But in any case, we also get a side plot about Franklin uncovering this conspiracy with this alien. I think we've seen the background before, but never really explored them, where he uncovers that they had actually wiped out another race that evolved on their planet centuries ago, and as a result they're beginning to die out because it turned out that they needed this other species for their survival. I must say I like this storyline much better when it was on Star Trek Voyager and the episode Remember, which was an amazing episode, and by the way came out before this episode, just saying. But that being said, this storyline was okay and somewhat interesting, so it's fine. Overall, this episode was, it's actually pretty good. So next is Day of the Dead. The episode is stupid. This episode is stupid. It reminds me a lot of bad episodes of Season 1. It's just super cheesy in the worst possible way. The whole way it was set up, these weird aliens wanting to celebrate the Day of the Dead, and they're like, beware of the Day of the Dead, woo! And Lockley was like, yeah, whatever. And then, surprise, 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 I'm so shocked. That night, the dead do actually come. What? And really, it should have been called The Night of the Dead. and they even sort of mention this, but then again, that's not an established Mexican tradition, so it makes all this sense that these aliens would have to stick to Mexican traditions. Anyway, it was so ham-fisted the way they set up for the, these two of these silly aliens. I can't remember what the hell they're called, but anyway, I'll just call them silly aliens. So these silly aliens draw a line of the section of the station that they bought for the night. So that part of the station that they bought, that little section, will experience the Day of the Dead. And so that night, Garibaldi comes, he comes across and he's like, oh, this line here, that's where your section, oh, my quarter zone is on that side of the zone. And so Garibaldi's like, so my room is in your zone. And the aliens are like, yes, your room is in our zone. So my room is in your zone. Yes, your room is in our zone. So let me get this straight here. So what you're saying is, my room is in your zone? Actually, as a matter of fact, yes, that is what we're saying. Your room is in our zone. Oh. So just to be clear, my room is in your zone? Yes. I'm exaggerating, but that's basically what that scene felt like to me. So, it made me wonder if this could possibly be setting up for something. God damn it. So, when the dead actually return, it's dull and boring. For one, why the fuck does Mr. Warden appear to Lanier? He never even met him. That was stupid. He definitely should have appeared to Londo. But instead they wanted that little dancing girl from season 1 that Mr. Warden killed in season 3, but they must have not been able to get the actress in season 3 because she wasn't even in that episode. She died. But anyway, they got her to come back. Problem is that she's dead, so she no longer wants to marry Londo for his money or want him for his money, so she actually wouldn't want to shag him anymore. But they pretend that she does. And Garibaldi gets an appearance from the ground pounder that he kind of had a one-night stand with in the episode Grupos. They were never really that close. She was a throwaway character in a throwaway episode, so I care not about her reappearing. So the only one that I actually thought kind of worked was Lockley's visitor, which gives us a glimpse into her very unpredictable and different kind of backstory, where she used to be a drug addict and her best friend overdosed and died, is now visiting her so many years later. That was actually interesting. It's kind of ironic that the one dead character that we're unfamiliar with is the only one that ends up being interesting. Anyway, we also get a cameo by Penn and Teller, who played the comedians mentioned in dialogue in the previous season, Rebo and Zudi. And in concept, I'd like the idea of getting real-life comics to play aforementioned comics in the show. But its execution was frankly boring. I didn't find them funny, and there seemed to be no point to their scenes whatsoever. They were just a complete waste of time, as was this episode, which was a total wash. So, next episode is The Kingdom of the Blind, which is a mildly interesting episode. I do like the storyline of Shakar being Londo's bodyguard on his trip to Centauri Prime. It did have a nice irony to it that Shakar himself appreciated. And it was great how he loved flaunting in front of the other Centauri who knew that they couldn't do anything to them. And then the scene where someone tried to kill Londo, but the Drakh interceded on his behalf, was a very effectively creepy scene. They, of course, want Londo alive so they can use him as their puppet later on, and of course so they can get revenge on him. So this was a nice bit of foreshadowing, and again, very creepy. It is perhaps a flaw in his character that he didn't really know how to react to this and didn't really tell anyone about this. Now, the Babylon 5 storyline with the Telepaths, I was a bit less enthused about. First, we get the revelation at the end of the previous episode that the Vorlons created Telepaths in order to fight the Shadows, which makes perfect sense and total sense, seeing how the Shadows were vulnerable to Telepaths. I wouldn't be surprised if JMS had actually planned this all along and was just waiting for the right time to reveal it. However, Skinny Fabio's response to this is a bit wonky. Like, I get that he'd be angry, and every time he brings up the need for retribution because of this, Lita keeps saying that the Vorlons are gone, but he keeps ignoring her. And I'm actually with her on this one. And so Skinny Fabio, Byron, he then does something truly idiotic. Now, I'm torn on whether or not this is bad writing done for plot convenience, or the writers purposely were trying to portray Byron as a giant, flaming idiot. Possibly is a combination of both. But Skinny Fabio bites the hand that feeds him, as Sheridan has been his closest ally. Sheridan stuck his neck out to protect him by granting him his people's sanctuary on Babylon 5, and he was the only one that stood in the way of the Cyclops when they tried to take them away. But this moron doesn't seem to realize this, which, to be honest, I don't really buy, and he does something that's completely moronic for many reasons. So he tells the Alliance that he has information on the raids that all the member worlds have been suffering. But when he shows up to an Alliance meeting to reveal this information, which all the alien members of the Alliance have been dying to know because they've been suffering these attacks and they want to know who's been attacking him. But instead, Byron shows up and I was like, I lied about that. I don't know anything about that. Instead, I want to blackmail you into forcing you to give us a planet against your will. So he brings up the fact that the Vorlons created telepaths in order to shame them and say that it's their responsibility to look after them and give them their own planet, which is really shady logic to begin with, but it gets even worse. Because then he moves on to blackmail, where he says his telepaths have been following the delegates from each world in the Alliance and have gleaned their secrets. And so if they don't do what he asked, he'll expose all their secrets to the public. So I guess Skinny Fabio never heard the saying, you attract more bees with honey than vinegar. This, quite frankly, was the dumbest thing that he could have possibly done. I don't know if I can think of anything dumber he could have done. If he just went to an airlock and thrown himself out of it, I think that would be less dumb than what he did here. Not only did it put him at odds with his closest ally, but all of these member worlds of the Alliance were already upset. They were already really on edge because their ships were being attacked, their civilians were being killed with impunity by an unknown attacker. And when they think they're going to get an answer, or at least some sort of lead that might help them in this, instead they get blackmailed and get their secrets threatened, which of course would only have the effect of pissing them off and making them want to lash out. This is really, it's the dumbest thing he could have possibly done. And also we find out in later episodes that Skinny Fabio had no intention of following through with this threat, because the worlds of the Alliance don't capitulate to him, and surprise, surprise, and he doesn't follow through. So why make the threat in the first place if you don't intend to use it? All you do is alienate anyone who may have possibly been on your side, and you unite everyone against you. Really, Byron must be the dumbest character to ever appear on Babylon 5. Either that or he wants to die. I did in fact hear this theory postulated that he wants to martyr himself and that his ultimate goal is just to die so he can be a martyr, and so he pisses everyone else off on purpose so he can get killed. But in doing so, he puts all of his followers at risk. And some of them do die because of his decision here. Whereas, had he tried to work with his allies and help them and cultivate goodwill, he could have accomplished something for them. Some kind of better life, maybe not the whole planet to themselves. But, they're not going to get that anyway. So threatening to blackmail them is... all that going to do is screw them. But had they worked with these members of the Alliance, they could have gotten something better than what they had at the moment. And I do find it frustrating that Skinny Fabio is being so colossally moronic. And I don't completely buy it either, because he's a telepath. He can read people's minds. Surely he would know that they would not respond positively to threatening them, unless, again, he wanted them to kill him, in which case he's an asshole, so fuck him. But this episode did have some good aspects to it, so ultimately it was okay. So then we get a tragedy of telepaths. So this continues on the story arc with Skinny Fabio's dumbass gambit, which led him and his group to locking themselves inside their little cubby hole and wielding themselves in and using their telepathic powers to stop the security forces from trying to get in. However, before they locked themselves in, a splinter group broke out who didn't agree with Skinny Fabio's non-violent methods, and they instead choose violence. So there's a crisis, and Lockley calls Bester and the Cyclops in to help deal with it, and this time Sheridan does not stand in his way, and in fact supports Bester's help, which again proves why Skinny Fabio is being the biggest dumbass that ever walked the Earth or the space station, in this case, whatever. So Skinny Fabio tries to negotiate with Lockley, who risks her life to enter the sealed-off zone, but all he does is be a giant idiot and refuses to bend, so it's all just a waste of time anyway, so what's the point of this scene? Meanwhile, the violent telepaths that are on the loose get into fights, and they steal weapons, and they start firefights, and they all get, killed or beaten up or whatever. But here's the thing. Aren't they telepaths? The show seems to forget this whenever it's convenient for the plot. Like when the innocent telepaths were getting beaten up by the mobs, why don't they use their telepathy to make their attackers think they're covered in spiders or something? I mean, we've seen them do it before. We know we can do it. It's been established. So why don't they? Answer, plot. Likewise, when these violent telepaths are fighting the mundanes, why do they fight them on their level? Why don't they use their telepathic skills for their advantage? I mean, it makes sense. Why are they just... I mean, it makes sense when they're squaring off against the Cyclops because they're also telepaths, so, they wouldn't have an advantage there. But when they're fighting, the mundanes, like Zack or his security forces, or the angry mobs, why don't they use their telepathic powers? Again, answer, plot. But this episode wasn't all bad as we continue the story of G'Kar and Londo, where they encounter Nataf, who we haven't seen since season 2, as she kind of just disappeared. I mean, she was meant to be G'Kar's aide, the way Veer was Londo's and Linear was Delen's, but all of a sudden G'Kar's aide just disappeared and he didn't have one. Which I never liked, but at least they did follow up on what happened to her. And to see G'Kar put his foot down with Londo and demand that he rescue her, or that he burn the whole palace down, that was great. But what's more interesting is the way Londo responded to this, is that he's not at all resistant. He doesn't protest, which is what he would have done in the past, but he had, he's since had this revelation at the start of the season where he's actively seeking redemption for what happened to G'Kar and his people, so he full on goes along with it and in fact comes up with a brilliant plan to free Nataf, and it works. So I did like this part of it. Not a horrible episode, but simply a competent and passable one. So next we get Phoenix Rising, which is the conclusion of Skinny Fabio's story arc, and boy, I did not like it. They've already painted his character into a corner, both figuratively and literally, by making him such a moron, but here his dumbassery soars to new heights. And we also get some backstory to find out that Skinny Fabio used to be Bester's protege, and that they worked together, and it's presented as if this should be some earth-shattering, groundbreaking revelation, but to be honest, I really don't care, and ultimately doesn't change anything. Skinny Fabio is still a colossal dumbass. In any event, the remaining violent telepaths take hostages, in which we get to see the full scene that was hinted at in the season 4 finale, the deconstruction of falling stars, which, as I mentioned in my coverage of season 4, sucked and was the only episode of season 4 that did, mainly because it was actually made during season 5, so it's really a season 5 episode. But in that episode we saw a glimpse of Garibaldi being held hostage, And then this message from Sheridan comes in where he says that he absolutely will not negotiate with the hostage takers under any circumstance. And so the hostage takers get ready to kill him. And in the deconstruction of Falling Stars, that was played off as a huge moment, like it's big cliffhanger. But in actuality, it didn't really amount to much and was mostly just another throwaway scene. So it was a huge letdown because right where the deconstruction of Falling Stars scene ended, the good guys come in and save the day. But this does bring the skinny Fabio out of hiding, who finally comes to his senses and agrees to stand down, and he makes a deal with President Sheridan for their peaceful surrender as long as they don't have to go with the Cyclops. But when Bester finds out about this, he's not happy, so he ambushes the Telepaths just as they're surrendering. And this is the part of the episode that really pisses me off, because the Cyclops bust in and shooting starts, and it's very, very clear that Sheridan did not sanction this and that he is against it and would uphold their deal, which the Telepaths should know, because again, they're telepaths. But no! When some hazard chemical spills, Byron takes the gun and threatens to blow it up and killing himself and all of his followers along with him. And when Sheridan tries to talk him out of it and reassures him that he will still uphold his part of the bargain and they can still go through with it, Byron's just like, no, it's too late. Too much blood has already been spilled. What the hell are you even talking about, drama queen? It's not too late. Nothing has changed. Bester tried to be a dick, and you guys freaked out for no good reason, but now Sheridan is willing to uphold the deal, and you know that he is, because you're a telepath. I mean, hardly anyone even died in this attack. I think it was just that one dude, and it's kind of his own fault for freaking out for no good reason. Too much blood has already been spilled. What the fuck are you even talking about? This scene was so poorly written. It's obvious the writer simply wanted him to kill himself, and the way they get him to this decision is so contrived, so fake, so poorly constructed. It's just awful. And again, one could argue that Byron's main objective has always been to martyr himself, but if that's the case, why surrender to Sheridan in the first place? It looks like he would have been it looked like he was all on board with Sheridan's deal. So I insist it's more of a case of clunky and bad writing. The writers were obviously trying to cram down the viewer's throats the idea that helping these refugees was a mistake and would lead to dire, tragic consequences. But the issue with this is that the only reason it led to tragic consequences is that they were idiots. Particularly Skinny Fabio, who's a moron. And they made stupid decisions that most reasonable people would not make. So it makes it hard for me to have any sympathy for them. Plus, we get a scene where Skinny Fabio tells Lita to go to safety as he's about to blow himself up so she can continue the good fight. And then everyone just stops what they're doing for like 3 minutes, so we can have this super long like goodbye scene where the lovers can kiss one the last time. Seriously, they just stop with it. Nobody shot. They just, let's stop, and these people are about to kill themselves. Let's not do anything to prevent this from happening. Let's just sit there and stare at these two people kiss. It was so incredibly, ridiculously fake. This episode was just poorly written, poorly executed. It should have been good, but it was horrible. So, next episode is The Ragged Edge. And this episode is pretty interesting as we get to visit the Drazi homeworld for the first time. We have seen some other homeworlds from time to time, like the Minbari homeworld, the Centauri homeworld, and the Narn homeworld. But I thought it was interesting visiting the homeworld of an alien race that started out as a really minor background alien, but had become more and more important. I love the way their culture was fleshed out, how it's explained that how their architecture is different based on their culture, that they have bigger balconies and smaller rooms because they used to be a mostly outdoor race, which kind of makes sense since they're so scaly. So the world building here in this episode is great, but the story's not bad either. Now, With the skinny Fabio storyline over, they can now focus more on the raids that the Alliance members have been experiencing, where that comes to a head where all the member races refuse to participate in the Alliance until they figure out who's attacking him and help come up with a plan to stop it. And Sheridan and the others still have no idea who's attacking them, and now they're desperate to find out. So they find out there's a survivor of an attack, a smuggler who is a smuggler, so he knows how to get away, which is a very interesting concept. So Garibaldi goes to the Drazi homeworld to find him, but he's killed before Garibaldi can get to him, but he does find something on his person that turns out to be a button only found on Centauri royal guards, thus implicating the Centauri in the attacks. So this is all pretty interesting. We also get the beginning of the storyline where G'Kar becomes a religious figure because someone published his book while he was away, and I didn't hate the storyline, but I wasn't all that crazy about it either, so whatever, it's fine. Anyway, pretty good episode, but not one of the best. So next episode is The Core is Mother, The Core is Father. And this is another one of those concept episodes I mentioned earlier that Season 5 was doing a lot, where they focus on episodes more from the perspective of other characters than the main Babylon 5 characters. And as I mentioned before, these type of episodes were failures. And this was certainly true about this episode, as it's pretty terrible. It focuses on Bester training like these two cadets as they track a telepathic killer in Babylon 5, and one of these trainees is killed halfway through the episode, so who cares? And the main story about the rogue telepath, it was so generic, so cliche, so throwaway, it was a waste of time, and the focus on the side corps was just stupid. It was a gimmick, and it did not work. So I do not like this episode. It's horrible, it's boring, so moving on. So, the next episode is Meditations on the Abyss. Now, there's been an ongoing storyline this season with the Lanier I haven't touched on yet, but now we get to an episode where it's the main focus, so I guess I finally have to talk about it. And if you can't tell already, I hated this storyline. I think it's really dumb. Ever since the end of Season 4, they hinted that Lanier is in love with Delenn, which I think is really, really stupid. The two of them have always had a really nice mentor-protege relationship, and just because they're opposite genders, they have to create romantic feelings, which I think is really dumb, and it ruins Lanier's character, to be honest. And in Season 5, this comes to a head, where he goes as far as to leave Babylon 5 and join the Rangers, so he doesn't have to be around Delenn anymore. You know, throughout the show, he's always behaved like one of the Rangers anyway, and he was always a badass, so it seems kind of like a formality to him to actually join the Rangers. But in this episode, we see him training, which is stupid because, as I said, he's pretty much already a Ranger, and the Rangers leave these trainees stranded and make them think they're going to die. Yeah, that's smart. Nothing could go wrong there. And the plot follows the other trainees being a moron and trying to kill himself, but the Lanier stops him, blah, 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 blah. I really hate Space Cadet episodes like this. I hate what they did with Lanier's character this season, so I hate this episode. So moving on. So next episode is Darkness Ascending. Now this episode was a much better use of Lanier as he goes off on his own to try to track the Raiders to find definitively who they are. And it's a very exciting sequence where he puts his life on the line and follows the Raiders finally to learn that it's the Centauri, and more importantly gather proof. And this whole thing I thought was pulled off really well. But the question I do have is, later we learn that this isn't really the Centauri, it's the Drakh using like remote Centauri vessels to frame the Centauri for the attack, and the Drakh are in control of Centauri Prime, so in a way it's the Centauri, but most of the Centauri are completely unaware of this. So, the question I have here, if the whole point is to frame the Centauri for the attack, why make it so hard for the Alliance to figure out who's attacking? You think this would be something they would actually want to make pretty obvious, because the whole point is to frame the Centauri and to get the Alliance to attack the Centauri. I guess you could argue by making it hard to find, it makes it look more like the Centauri, are responsible and that they're hiding it and they're lying. But I think they made it a little too hard to find. Just my opinion. Anyway, this episode also touches on Garibaldi's drinking problem, and this is another long-term story arc I haven't touched on yet. So let's get into this now. And to be more accurate to describe the storyline, it would be Garibaldi's relapse, because that's what it is. And it's been established since the start of the show that he is a recovering alcoholic, and so it makes all the sense in the world that his feelings of impotency involving not being able to get revenge on Bester and the way Bester violated him in the first place would cause him to slip back into his alcoholism. And I found this storyline very natural, very humanizing, but on the other hand also a tad bit cliched and just another typical storyline of an alcoholic that we've seen dozens of times before. And in this episode, Liz visits the station and tries to get him to return to Mars with her, but instead discovers that he's slipping back into his alcoholism. And again, I did find this very realistic, the way he tries to insist that he's fine and he doesn't have a problem, and then the show makes it clear that he does. And the fact that this threatens his relationship with Liz is interesting, and arguably his relapse has already had dire consequences because his friend on the drowsy homeworld got killed while he was in alcohol-induced slumber. But of course, it's only going to get worse, and I do kind of like that, despite the lack of originality. The other storyline we get is in this episode is Lita making a deal with Shakar, as we see she's striving to fight for telepathic rights in Skinny Fabio's name, but she's running out of funds, so she makes a deal with Shakar for unlimited funds. Well, not unlimited, but a shitload, by supplying the Narns who have no telepaths with the possibility to create their own telepaths, which is really interesting. I love this deal with the devil type situation here. It's very enticing. So overall, pretty good episode. So next we come to All My Dreams Torn Asunder, and this is a very exciting episode. Very exciting, as Sheridan now has all the evidence that he needs. That's the Centauri are responsible for the raids that have been plaguing all of the Alliance members, but the act of making all this public is a big risk. As big as risk as any, has its potential of shaking the status quo of the galaxy to its core, as the Centauri are a huge superpower, and to reveal that they have been attacking everyone else, killing their citizens, crippling their supply lines, it could have major repercussions for the entire galaxy. And it was fascinating seeing the various characters testifying and supplying their evidence, while the whole time Londo virulently denies it until Lanier presents his irrefutable visual evidence that literally shows the Centauri attacking the supply ships. And so Sheridan announces the Alliance will blockade the Centauri until they admit they were responsible and make reparations. And Londo, being the proud person he is, refuses to give in to these demands and calls them illegal, and thus this builds to war. So this is really exciting. And what's interesting is, from Londo's perspective, the Centauri aren't responsible because really they aren't. It's the Drakh, but nobody knows this. So this is all great. But from here on out, this episode is kind of okay as it builds towards war, and Garibaldi's drinking problem comes to a head and he ends up completely fucking something up, which causes dire consequences, which was all too predictable, so whatever. However, I will say this whole storyline is hurt by the fact that we know what it leads to. We know that the Drakh will never get found out. We know that this will lead to the destruction of Centauri Prime. No one will know the Drakh is actually behind all this, and they will continue to manipulate the Centauri. And that's what I find frustrating, as I would have actually preferred that the Drakh be found out. I thought this could have led to some really interesting, some really dynamic storytelling, but they have already handicapped themselves by showing the future that shows that the Drakh are still in control of Centauri decades from now. Now, I think they could have went the Star Trek route and chose to disregard this future and just dismiss it as a possible future that never came to pass. But it seems that Babylon 5 has chosen to stick with the whatever happened method of time travel, where things cannot be changed, which I can respect. In fact, I do really respect that. But at the same time, I think it kind of hampers his storytelling here. But it's still a very good episode. So next we come to Movements of Fire, and this was a great episode. To me, this episode recaptured the magic of Season 4. It felt like a Season 4 episode, so it made me re-examine what I thought of Season 5 as piss poor, as it explores the full consequences of war that has broken out between the Centauri and the Alliance. And I even go as far to say I like this Centauri war storyline better than the Shadow storyline of Season 4, because the Shadow War was more interesting when the Shadows were operating, well, in the shadows, trying to manipulate things. When it came up to a full-blown war in Season 4, and especially when the Vorlons got involved, it was kind of just another bland fantasy superpowers going around blowing stuff up. I found this Centauri storyline much more interesting and allowed for some great character moments. Character moments for Sheridan, Londo, Lita, and many more characters. Plus, I found it much more interesting, the reveal that the Drakh were the true instigators, but that they operated in the shadows. So I frankly like this episode better than the Shadow War episodes of Season 4. Now, to be clear, the stakes in the war weren't very high. It wasn't like in the Shadow War where the entire galaxy was at risk, as this war was basically the Centauri versus everyone else. And as powerful as the Centauri are, they don't stand a chance against everyone else. As we see, when simply the Narn and the Drossy team up, they're able to take out the Centauri just by themselves. So the stakes weren't what made the storyline interesting. What made it interesting was the intrigue and the conspiracy behind it, and that the Drakh wanted the Centauri to be wiped out. In fact, that was their entire point of the war, and so the Narn and the Drossy played right into their hands. And seeing the plot of Lita and Franklin going to the Drossy homeworld to uncover this conspiracy, and of the plot of Sheridan trying to stop the Drossy and the Narn before it was too late, was super intense. Really well done. I absolutely love the scene at the end of the episode where Londo finally meets with the Regent, and his acting, the Regent's acting all insane. We know it's because he has one of those little thingies on his shoulder that's apparently called a keeper, and it's controlling him. But Londo doesn't know this, and so that scene was so incredibly creepy. I never really cared that much for the Regent before, but the actor playing him does such an outstanding job in this scene. He's just so creepy, especially when he reveals that he deliberately took down the Centauri's defenses so that the Narn and the Drossy could waste to their homeworld unopposed. It was super intense. So a fantastic episode. One of the best of the entire show, in my opinion. So after that, we get the Fall of Centauri Prime, which is the follow-up episode that finishes off this Centauri War storyline. I must say that is one of those things I love about Babylon 5, is that it always wraps up storylines nicely, and it gives you the full consequences and resolutions to the big events that occur. Too many shows, especially sci-fi shows in the 90s, will worry too much about being anticlimactic, which always annoys me. Maybe it's just my taste, but I love getting full resolutions, and I love that Babylon 5 always does that, even if it means having an episode without a real plot or a big threat. That being said, sometimes episodes like these do have a subplot with a threat in order to create suspense, and this is the case with the whole thing about Delenn and Lanier being on a ship that's damaged and at risk and of being lost in hyperspace forever. I didn't care for that storyline. I thought it was a waste of time. It was just an artificial way to create tension. What was more interesting to me was Londo coming face to face with the Drakh. Now, we get more of this amazing some creepiness from the Regent. But what I really love is the callback to season 4 when Londo executed Mr. Morden, and Morden called out that he'd regret it because they have powerful allies. And Londo was just like, yeah, whatever. And he just dismissed it as idle threats. But turned out, wasn't so idle. Now, if the viewer was paying attention and they remembered the future where Centauri Prime was in flames, they know that this wasn't an idle threat. But to be honest, in the moment, I was kind of reacted the same way Londo did. And I was like, yeah, allies, whatever, shithead. But now we see the full payback as those allies have indeed fully paid the Centauri, and Londo in particular, back in the worst possible way. And that was absolutely brilliant. Again, I complained about the Drakh being boring in season 4, but here I love the use of them. I thought it was brilliant. And there was some tension in this episode because the Centauri fleet that the Regent had sent away was returning, and they were going to be pissed when they got back. But that tension wasn't really long-lived because we soon learned that the Drakh wanted Londo to order them to stand down, so there wasn't a real threat after all. Still a good episode, though, and that farewell scene between Londo and G'Kar was amazing. It was very touching, particularly when G'Kar finally forgives Londo, and you can tell he means it. You can tell that it means a lot to Londo to hear that, so it was really touching. But the rest of the episode was pretty much going through the paces as Londo did what the Drakh wanted him to. He wanted them to cut ties with the Lions. So, and the boring storyline with Delenn and Lanier is resolved. So, whatever. It's a really good episode, but not quite a great one. So next is Wheel of Fire, which is another really good episode where other lingering storylines come to an head, such as Garibaldi's relapse, which comes to a head when Garibaldi shows up to an alliance meeting very drunk, very obviously drunk, so his relapse becomes public knowledge, and I love the way this is handled. I think it's a bit less cliche than the preceding storyline where Garibaldi does come to terms with this problem, and I particularly like the scene with Sheridan where he's like, I'm not angry at you, I'm not mad at you, I'm just disappointed. That it was very touching. I particularly like Lockley's conversation with him and how she was forceful and talked and was going to talk to him no matter if he wanted to or not. And she relayed her own experience with addiction, which was first explored in the Horrible Day of the Dead episode. That was actually really touching, and the main thing that convinces me that Lockley's character isn't entirely a wash or a waste of time, because you really see her as a full fleshed out character, and her the way she relates to Garibaldi was just really interesting. But what I really love about this episode was the scene where they go to arrest Lita. That scene was amazing. So we know she's been funding the telepath movement to get their own home world with all the money that she's been getting from G'Kar and Veer, but apparently she's using some of it to arm terrorists who are attacking the Psi Corps. And Earth, of course, isn't happy about this, so they ask Lockley to arrest her, but when she and Zach go to arrest Lita, she doesn't want to go, and she begins tapping her fingers on the table, and then absolutely everyone around them is also tapping their fingers on the table. But Lockley insists that she's coming with her, but then Lita starts slapping the table, and then everyone around them is slapping the table. And when Lockley still insists that she's going to be arrested, the people start approaching Lockley and her security forces very menacingly. So you can tell, it's obvious that Lita's controlling them, and it just goes to show how powerful she's become. And I must say, I absolutely love this scene. I thought it was amazing, super intense, super creepy, maybe one of my favorite scenes of the entire show. And when Lockley orders Zach to arrest her, he's frozen. And apparently, it appears Lita has the upper hand, so she can't stop. She says that she can't stop someone who was touched by the Vorlons. But then, Sheridan appears with a gun to her head and reminds her that she wasn't the only one who who was touched by the Vorlons, meaning he is immune to her powers. Now, that was cool. I did like that. But is it wrong of me to say I actually side with Lita in this case, and I wish Sheridan didn't show up? The episode tries to present it as if Lita's losing control or going insane or becoming a villain or something like that. But I totally side with her. When she brings up all she's done to help them, which is true, they wouldn't have won the Shadow War without her. They wouldn't have beaten President Clark without her. And she helped them resolve the situation with the Centauri. She continues to help them even more, so that their own officers, more than some of their other officers do. And yet, she's still disregarded. They treat her like shit, don't give her any money. And frankly, I think she has every right to be upset. And after all, the terrorism that she's supporting is just attacking the Psi Corps. And frankly, they deserve to be attacked. In fact, they're the one remnant of the corruption of the Clark administration that's still around. So fuck them. But they do arrest her, and I do like what happens next as Garibaldi makes a deal with her to remove the block that Bester has in his mind, preventing him from killing him, in exchange for using his wife's corporation to help fund the Telepaths to use this unique skills to make it undetectable from the authorities. So he agrees to this, and he agrees to fund the attacks on the Cyclops as a way of getting back at Bester, which I think makes a lot of sense for Garibaldi. If you can't have the block removed, the next best thing is to a green light of support attacks that would piss Bester off and get back to him in the ways possible. So the plan is, in 2 years, if he keeps up his part of the bargain, that Lita will remove the block. Now, to my knowledge, this storyline has never been resolved, or at least we never got a direct follow-up to what happened with Lita or Garibaldi. There's been some talk about a telepathic war, so perhaps this was covered in some like supplemental material that I haven't seen. But we do know, as we'll see in 3 episodes down the line, that Garibaldi is still alive, and he's still married, and he's still in charge of Edgar Industries in a couple decades from now. So we know that it at least went well for him. So I'm guessing that he did get his revenge on Bester, but yeah, I don't know for sure. But either way, very good episode. Very good episode. It was kind of bland with the whole thing about Delenn being pregnant and all that, but still a good episode. So, next episode is Objects in Motion, which again is more winding down of the story as the show is coming to an end. But the through story in this episode, the way to create suspense is there's an assassin on Babylon 5 who wants to kill Garibaldi and Liz, and so number 1 comes on board to stop them. Now, they did reveal her real name in this episode, but I always think of her as number 1, so I'll just keep calling her that. She, of course, is the leader of the Mars Resistance that helped them remove Clark from power, and she had a little fling with Franklin, and it was cool seeing them rehash that fling in this episode. It's also cool getting follow-up on Mars's independence and how, in theory, Earth recognizes their independence, but in practice they try to thwart them in any way they can, which again totally makes sense. So it was cool seeing Sheridan offer to help by opening an embassy for Mars on Minbar, where they can operate beyond the reach of the Earth Gov, which was pretty cool. And although I don't like the main plot of the assassin as it's resolved way too easily, I didn't mind it because the threat or the suspense wasn't the point of that plot. It does, what it does is it builds a character story such as Garibaldi reasserting control of Edgar Industries after he realized it was the board that tried to kill him. So he simply has them all fired and replaces them with troublemakers. I love that. It's so Garibaldi. And of course, the whole thing was Jakar being treated like a religious icon. is totally, and he's totally against it. It all comes to a head when he elects to just run away with Lita, which seems to be a good solution to both their problems, and it makes sense that one of his loony followers would hate this, so he would try to kill him. So not a groundbreaking episode, but pretty good. So next episode is Objects at Rest, which is the true epilogue of Season 5. Now, it's funny, we did already get a few epilogues in Season 4 that was meant to be winding down to the end of the show, but then there came another season after that, and the other season introduced a lot of new storylines, so now they have to sort of wind down again. Now, this isn't the final episode of the show, but as I'll cover in the next episode, it was filmed. The final episode of the show was actually filmed in Season 4. So this was the last episode filmed for the show. And it does have that epilogue feel to it. And I do like that it has a nice send-off to all the characters. As Garibaldi goes back to Mars, gets married to Liz, Franklin moves on to Earth, finds his own replacement. Sheridan and Delenn move to Minbar in order to raise their son. Shakar and Lita go off and they're exploring the galaxy. And I did like it. It has a sense of finality and saying goodbye. That is until the end where we get this stupid storyline of Lanier coming across Sheridan in a tough spot where his life is in danger. Instead of helping him, he leaves him to die because he's jealous of him. And Delenn, fuck, that's so dumb. I don't buy this for a single solitary moment. Even if I take this whole being in love with Delenn storyline at face value, which I don't because it's stupid and already out of character for him, but leaving that aside for the moment, this decision is still completely and utterly out of character for him. And then when Sheridan survives, he runs off and hides out of shame. That was the worst possible ending to Lanier's storyline they could have possibly come up with ever. But the rest of the episode was good. Even the scene where Londo has dinner with Sheridan and Delenn and gets to say goodbye, although we learn the reason why the Drakh let him do it is so that he could implant a keeper intended for their son when he grows up. But that's another storyline that's not resolved unless it does so in some supplemental material I haven't seen. But yeah, that Lanier stuff sucked, but otherwise a good episode. So next, we get to the finale of Babylon 5, Sleeping in Light. Now, as I surely touched on before, this episode was filmed in Season 4, when they thought Season 4 was going to be the last season, but when the show got picked up for Season 5, they plucked it from Season 4 and decided to hold on to it until the end of Season 5, so it could be the final episode of the show. Now, I'm sure I mentioned this before too, but I personally think this was a huge mistake and that they should have aired this episode in Season 4 anyway, even though there was going to be a Season 5. In fact, as I said, Season 5 should have been called a sequel series, so this could have been the finale of Babylon 5 anyway, but still the finale of Season 4. And I mentioned before, if I ever rewatch Babylon 5 again, I'm going to watch this episode at the end of Season 4, regardless of which DVD it's on. I think before I said I wouldn't bother with Season 5, but now after watching Season 5, I think I would watch Season 5, but still, I would still watch this episode at the end of Season 4 and then watch Season 5, but that's just me. Anyway, this episode is very much of Season 4, and it's obvious. When I first saw this episode on the Season 5 DVD as the final episode of Season 5, and I had no idea that this was filmed in Season 4 and then transplanted into Season 5. When I was watching it, it seemed really odd to me. So I thought it was cool that they got Ivanova back, but where was Lockley? And how come no reference to whatever happened to Lita and the Telepaths and the Keeper left for Sheridan's son? Instead, we get like Season 4 references, like a lot of talk about Marcus and Lorian, whom we actually see at the end of the episode. We haven't seen them since like Season 4. So this was very odd to me until I learned it was originally filmed for Season 4. But once I learned it, I was like, oh, right. That makes so much more sense now. And then my next thought was, Well, that was dumb. They shouldn't have done that. Even though the episode takes place around 20 years after season 5, it still feels more like a season 4 episode because that's how it was originally intended to be. Apparently, JMS had said he considered altering the episode to fit more in season 5, but decided against it. I can't say I disagree with that, but I'd say he should have just aired in season 4 anyway. But leaving all that aside for the moment, the episode itself was kind of bland and not that interesting. It seemed like an epilogue that should have been like supplemental material. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think it sucked. The storyline of Sheridan having his final days where he knew he was going to die was interesting and touching. But there are parts of the episode that felt like it had its head up its own ass a bit too much. And it was a bit too melodramatic about the end of the series, particularly the scene where they blow up Babylon 5. I heard someone in the comments on another YouTube video where the video mentioned that the finale of Star Trek The Next Generation, All Good Things, was the best series finale of all time, and this comment mentioned that he disagreed and thought that the Babylon 5 finale, Sleeping in Light, was the best finale of all time. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to very strongly disagree with that. In fact, I would say All Good Things is at the very least 3 times better than this episode. Not to say that I think this is a bad finale. When I did a top 5 worst series finales, this episode wasn't on it, not by a long shot. There are much more worst series finales than this one. But it also didn't make my top 10 favorite series finales either. And to be fair, I was having a hard time coming up with 10 series finales that I loved because honestly, they're not very many good ones. Most of the shows can't tackle a finale very well. In fact, I did include in my top 10 series finale the Lost series finale and the Battlestar Galactica series finale in that top 10, despite the fact that I have major issues with both of them. But I'd still put both of them ahead of this episode, this episode's fine, as I said, but I do think it has its head up its own ass. I'm sorry, but it does. But still, it's a fairly decent episode, not a bad one by any stretch of the imagination. So I did mention several times that I would cover the various Babylon 5 TV movies, and I stand by that statement that I won't cover them because they are subpar. I mostly didn't care for them, but I will briefly cover the Babylon 5 TV movie Call to Arms because I did watch that recently because I remember that being actually being good, and it dealt with the Drakh. And after having just watched season 5, I was curious to see what they did with the Drakh. And honestly, the Drakh weren't really the main villain of this movie, and they were more like a MacGuffin that they just set the goal that Sheridan had to accomplish, and they didn't really feature much in the movie themselves. This film did reintroduce the Technomages. If you recall, I hated them, so I wasn't too happy to see them come back. But other than that, it had a decent storyline with Sheridan being united with 2 others in a quest to stop the Drakh, and they had this like spiritual connection, fulfilling their destiny. And so he teams up with them, and Garibaldi and Lockley think he's gone crazy until they learn that he's trying to stop the Drakh from destroying Earth. So that was cool. I think overall I would say this is the only Babylon 5 movie I did like. However, what I didn't like about it is that it ended on a cliffhanger that was meant to be resolved in the spin-off series Crusade, which annoyed me because it's annoying. It's more like a pilot for Crusade than a self-contained Babylon 5 movie. And I never did watch Crusade because it was planned to be a 5-year show, and it was canceled before they even finished their first season, so I didn't see the point of even bothering with it. Plus, I hear it's not very good anyway, so there you go. So now that I reached the end of season 5, and then some, let me get into my favorite and least favorite episodes of the season, so the best and worst. So let me first get to my least favorite episode, the worst episode of season 5. And there were a lot of contenders for this one. from Day of the Dead, Phoenix Rising, The Core's Mother, The Core's Father, and Meditations on the Abyss. But I'm definitely going to have to go with A View from the Galley. This is a horrible attempt at a Lower Decks ripoff. This is not just cheesy, but it's extremely annoying as well. With these two annoying mechanics eating lunch, talking about Sheridan. It was so fake. I didn't buy them. I didn't buy it at all. It was just, and you get a throwaway story with a throwaway villain that I did not give two shits about. Absolutely horrible episode. So as for the best episode of Season 5, there were a lot of contenders for this as well. Although all of them, except for one, was at the end of Season 5, which is when it got really good. But they range from the Paragon of Animals and All My Dreams Torn Asunder, the Fall of Centauri Prime, the Wheel of Fire, and Objects in Motion. But ultimately, I'll have to go with Movements of Fire and Shadow. The main episode that dealt with the Centauri War as Franklin and Lita uncover the Drakh plot on the Drozi homeworld, and Sheridan tries to stop the Narn and Drozi from fucking everything up, and Londo meets with the really creepy Regent, which was a great scene. I love. So, great episode. So my rating for Babylon 5 Season 5 out of 10 is a 7, very good. This is a very bipolar season. The first half has a lot of subpar episodes and plots that focus more on skinny Fabio, but the second half has a lot of great episodes and a plot that focuses more on the Centauri War. But overall, I'd say it's more good than bad. It's not good enough to have a score higher than a 7 because there's a lot of subpar episodes, but overall, not a bad season. So that's it for my review of Babylon 5 Season 5, but not the end of my Babylon 5 coverage, as next month I'll be back with my top 30 best episodes, my top 15 worst episodes, and my top 10 best and worst characters of Babylon 5. And the month after that, I'm going to continue my monthly videos where I cover every episode of an entire season, and this time I'll be returning to Star Trek to cover another show that focuses on a space station. Ooh. So be sure to keep an eye out for that, as well as I do many other videos and other shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek The Expanse, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.